Parish orphans and retrogrades. Parish orphans and retrogrades. Here for part two, I think the more interesting part by anyone's measure, to discuss what we were discussing yesterday, which is specifically Peter Thiel on the Antichrist, is Anthony Abbate from Avoiding Babylon, because we had a really great conversation about it, and I wanted to make that public. It's going to be a lot more in-depth than yesterday. Anthony, how are you?
Not bad, Tim. Nice to be back on. I was just talking to Steph about both of us celebrating 21 years of marriage this year and how old we all are now.
And how young we all think we are. Not like a dorky Sean Hannity telling people he practices practical street fighting kind of 70-year-old way.
That clip insane? Him talking about wrestling a gun out of a person's hand yesterday.
None of us are quite that, but and as a matter of fact, I was the first person to call this out after we went on Sage Steele's show. I had some really funny clips with that, and
I saw them. Yeah, they were funny.
Yeah, after Clav had him, and now everyone's talking about him. Like, well, he had funnier clips on Sage Steele where she's trying to choke back a laugh. You know, he thinks he's tough, and he's like 100 years old. And he's not young and he's not tough. But just so, like, when you're in your middle 40s, the way you are, Anthony, or me and Steph are, or your wife is, you really are caught off guard if you're still kind of fit and still kind of young looking, because you feel young still, but you're not.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I went wakeboarding last week. And my kids are like, whoa, you can still do that? I'm like, I'm not. Like, what do you mean I can still do that? Yes, I can still do that. It's fun.
Yeah. And I play basketball every day of my life, and I still win against my younger friends one-on-one, but who are very athletic. But at some point, it's going to slow down. I mean, you can't be 55 playing basketball and winning, or wakeboarding. Maybe you can.
I plan to be, but I was even just saying to you before, like, when you hit your 40s, you start looking at people in their 50s and like early 60s, and you're like, all right, what kind of shape are they in? What am I going to be? What kind of shape am I going to be in 10 years? How many more years left do I have of like doing the things that I'm capable of doing now? It's kind of weird when you hit your 40s, you start thinking about time differently.
You don't do it before you hit 40. Yeah. I didn't do it before 40, but not just how many years do I have doing basketball, or how many years do I have where I can continue snowboarding, but how many years do I have, period. And I didn't do that even at 35, 36, 37. You start wanting to pump the brakes at 38, 39, and then you realize these brakes don't work going forward. So it's kind of scary, isn't it? Yeah,
time goes fast, and none of us can escape it. So,
Dr. Heidegger's experiment, man. The Nathaniel Hawthorne short story about Fountain of Youth. You can't get it back, and that's kind of timely, because what I want to play a quick clip on Peter Thiel. This is an Ian Carroll clip describing really what he's up to, Peter Thiel, and I feel like I should have done more of the research for yesterday's show, because I wanted to actually talk about why the hell is Peter Thiel talking about the Antichrist. He's a better candidate for the Antichrist than for some antidote to the Antichrist. But I came up with some better ideas talking to a couple more friends last night after the show, and I got sent this really good clip. I want to have you guys listen to the first minute of. And it's all about wacky gay billionaires that seem to be doing some groomer thing with tech billionaires to be a part of the club. Really weird. They have their own secret society. And I don't know. Let's start it out this way to bridge the gap between yesterday's show and today's show, which is really going to be on Benedict's Apocalypsis, but I don't want to completely leave behind why we're covering it. It's because of this weirdo, Peter Thiel. So we'll just watch 45 seconds, 60 seconds. There's a point I know I'll tell you to stop, Steffi.
I'm sure it's all good that Peter Thiel and Palantir are building out the surveillance state that's going to rule the world, that they're having a secret society meeting with all the most important, powerful people in government, finance, tech, media, etc. Not telling you about it. I'm sure it's all good.
Conspiracy theories are information is the oxygen.
There's so much evidence out there, even less than 1% is true. That collapse the current paradigm and change the whole planet.
Peter Thiel's secret society just got exposed online. A hacker discovered that their members list was just in the code on their website and has leaked it all on the internet. 222 names. Wired has done an expose and corroborated over 100 of those names. And there's a whole discussion to be had because the names that mark Peter Thiel's secret society, they're not just tech executives. They're not just hot gay men that Peter Thiel wants to get in with. They include treasury secretaries, members of the intelligence community, senior members of the military, members of government, senators, lots of venture capitalists, bankers from around the world, entertainers, movie stars. It's kind of like Bilderberg 2026. This secret society has existed for 20 years, but hardly any reporting, hardly any information that exists about them. They always put their phones in Faraday cages. They fly around the world. They even apparently have diplomatic delegations to Pakistan, of all places. This story will be enough to get you wondering exactly who does control the world and how much do we not know about this dialogue society that's operating right underneath all of our noses. Today is Thursday, June 18th. The story is breaking as of yesterday, and hopefully we'll get more information coming soon. But for now, we're going to dive all into it, into everything we know, into Peter Thiel and his whole gay thing he has going on over there in Silicon Valley. Welcome to Canceling and Carol. Let's get into it.
All right,
so
that's good
for
enough.
most people, the story starts with
What he talks about here, Anthony, is this secret society formed by Peter Thiel. I wish I'd seen this video before I did my video yesterday, called the Dialogue Society. And it's very secret society type stuff. He's had it for about 20 years. He did have Epstein invited back in the day. There are two Jeffrey Epsteins. Both of them have been part of it. And for about 20 years, Elon's been invited to one. I'm not sure if he went, but everyone, Jake Gyllenhaal, lots of actors, producers, tech people, software people, DOD people, CFR people, Council on Foreign Relations people. And what it comes down to is this, that Peter Thiel is more active on the side that would animate the spirit of Antichrist than he is, if you read that article or you watched my show yesterday, Parish Orphans and Retrogrades. He intoned like the perspective of a guy who's worried about the Antichrist, a guy who's worried about a kind of benign technocratic world order that's going to take over. But that's him, and that's what this dialogue society.
He is the thing he's warning about,
which is strange, which should grab our attention.
He's been talking about this for a while, though. He did an interview with Ross Douthat a while back where he was discussing the Antichrist. He's been going on about how he thinks the Antichrist is going to want to stop AI, and he's going to be the one who promises to put an end to AI, and he's going to be someone who promises peace. Like Thiel's got this weird interpretation of it because he says that he's going to promise world peace, the Antichrist. So I mean, he's been going on about this for a while.
Yeah, how convenient is that? You know, you're a tech billionaire and you're like, hey guys, let's everyone get out your pitchforks, jump on the Antichrist. He's the guy that's going to want to stop my software company or my software type. But there is something that is consistent to Antichrist, which is he's always a peaceable figure. And there's this sharp distinction between the true Christ, who brought not peace but a sword, and Antichrist is going to be a figure that everyone of midwit or nitwit intelligence wants to line up behind. and he's going to say things that are palliative, things that are comfortable for people to hear. He's going to be an ostensible respite from the storm. And I guess that's where we should kick off today, that tech billionaires are actually good. They're well outfitted to be potential candidates for this, because they're always the ones that are promising to make our lives more comfortable and all that. But in that First Things story, which appeared last week, and which basically was just a printing of Peter Thiel's talk that he presented at Rome, and he feigned surprise that journalists and paparazzos were showing up. He was saying, like, hey, no, I'm on the Christian side. He's trying to play both sides of this. I'm worried about a benign technocratic order that takes everything over and supplants God. Look, I'm a good Christian. I know about Pope Benedict the 16th. This guy was, for 4 decades of his life, interested in eschatology. And that's really where our conversation began before I went live yesterday, before you went live, was on more the subject of Peter Thiel's talk, which is Benedict the 16th, Anthony. But I just didn't want to, for starters, to bridge the gap, I didn't want to completely leave aside the fact that this is very conspicuous. This is like if Jeffrey Epstein were to say, hey, we need to look at some of these eccentric billionaires who own islands. They seem kind of pedo-ish. This is what this is like with Peter Thiel.
I always thought Elon was a good candidate, though. Like, if you think about what Elon keeps talking about, even with AI, right? He's talking about how we'll no longer have to work, how there will be endless goods. It's basically, these guys are all promising like the reversal of the curses from the garden, right? Like, we're going to take away the pains of childbirth by, using artificial means for birthing children. You're no longer going to have to till the soil, and all means of production will just be handed out, and we'll have universal basic income. It's like all this weird stuff that they're trying to tell you. It's in a weird way like an inversion of what happens at the fall. So they're all trying to play God in some way. But Peter Thiel, what was really interesting about that article is he kept referencing Benedict first, but also like that George, I think what's his name? I have his book, actually. I read it. Giorgio Agamben, who's a Jew who was also obsessed with Benedict, and going through all of the different things that Benedict has said in reference to Tychonius and the mystery of iniquity, and that's kind of what kicked our conversation off yesterday, was that Benedict was a really weird guy. Like, me and you were talking about how, like, I had my like reversion in around 05 when I got married, and Benedict was just elected Pope, and I was like obsessed with Benedict. I just came back to the faith, and I used to put a lot more stock into the things he said. But now, after having 10 years of Francis and now almost a year and a half of Leo, you kind of look back on him with a different perspective.
Yeah.
And you start to say, all right, maybe he was a little kooky in some of the things he thought.
Yeah, I'd kind of given up on Benedict even by the end of his pontificate. I was sick of the UTAP 2-step that he did, which is say one thing, signal the other. I said on my show yesterday, John Paul II was do one thing and then do the opposite. Benedict 16 was say one thing and then signal or sort of symbolically say the opposite. And that's where, and that actually is something that Peter Thiel talks about in his talk from Rome from last week, which is not a bad observation. It's that Benedict was, you can call it the theme. If you're being nice, you can say, well, he's intellectually unambitious. He's not ambitious to follow through on his thoughts, and he actually at times contradicts his thoughts. It's weird to me that if you ask most trads or conservative Catholics, they're going to say, okay, well, we haven't had many great popes, the 7 conciliar popes in this era. But the 2 that I guess are the best are JP2 and Benedict 16, and they're each men of contradiction. They're JP2 is the man of sort of existential action contradiction, and Benedict is this intellectual self contradictory. So there's cognitive dissonance marking both of those two pontificates, JP2's being very long, Benedict's being relatively short. But, and JP2 is interesting when you examine what he approaches with eschatology. It's almost all Fatima centered. Benedict knows the third Fatima secret, which we'll cover later, but he has a lot of eschatology that's interesting, that's independent of Fatima, maybe a fortiori bolstered by it. But you mentioned the figures of Tychonius and Bonaventure, and his eschatology can stand on its own just as per those two interests of his, intellectual interests of his.
Okay, so the Tychonius stuff I'm very interested in, because I actually do think that's the way to understand the crisis. So Benedict makes multiple references to Tychonius. He makes a reference to it when talking about the O2 abuse crisis coming out. And he makes even his reference to when he gets elected, he says, "Pray that I do not run for fear of the wolves," is in some way a reference to Tychonius. So the Tychonius thesis is essentially, now Tychonius is a 4th century figure. He's a contemporary of Augustine. He's also a Donatist, okay? And he's not Catholic, he's a Donatist, but Augustine adopts his 7 rules for interpreting scripture. So yes, Tychonius is seeing this stuff in the 4th century, but Tychonius is really seeing it through scripture, through a typological lens, seeing that the whole story of scripture is about this bipartite body that is within the story of Israel in the Old Testament, and then within the church in the New. And it really is, it's really a tripartite body. So it's basically the body of Christ is the church, and the body of the devil is outside the church. But the body of the devil encroaches inside of the church in so much as you have bishops, and you could see it before our own eyes with guys like Supich and McElroy, and most of the guys who are in the modern hierarchy who claim to be Catholic, but do the work of the devil. So you have, it's basically like a Venn diagram that kind of creeps into the church, where the body of the devil overcomes the body of the Lord. And Tychonius is his whole thing is that the church is restraining this evil at all times, right? And it kind of creeps into Cardinal Manning also, where Cardinal Manning is constantly talking, well, not constantly, but in his Present Crisis of the Holy See is talking about the catacomb as the restrainer of this evil. And he ascribes it to the person of the Pope, because if you look at what the catacomb is in St. Paul's kind of describing it as both a system and a person. And Cardinal Manning says it is the person of the Pope, right? So like in some weird way, Benedict saw himself as being the Pope in a similar way, where Christ is never, Christ, like when you watch the life of Christ, he goes throughout his ministry and they want to stone him. They want to throw him off the ledge of the cliff, and they never can, because his time had not yet come. His time doesn't come until he allows it to happen. Right. And he says, "My time has now come. Now the Son of Man must be ground like wheat." And he gives himself up. And Benedict stepping down, like this was, I think, how he saw. I'm not saying this is a correct way to see it, but this is, I think, what he saw is him stepping down as him like laying down the restraining aspect of his papacy to allow this evil to come in, because he saw us as being in the passion of the church. He makes so many references to us being in the passion of the church. He makes it when he's responding to comments about Fatima. He makes it like throughout his entire papacy. He's constantly telling us we're experiencing this passion of the church.
So when just a few things there, you said a lot that's important there. Benedict is not making when he asks for the faithful to pray for him when he first enters the pontificate. One of his first acts: "Pray for me that I may not flee Rome for fear of the wolves." This is a broad, insinuative allusion to Tychonius, because it insinuates, without being a direct quote from Tychonius, that there's bad guys within the church. And that's this kind of tripartite demography of the church, if you will, demographical ecclesiology, whatever you want to call it. And if you have to flee from Rome because there are enough bad guys in Rome, maybe well over half, then this is a broad sweeping allusion to Tychonius. I think that's good. There's a strong affinity here. Benedict has a lifelong engagement with Tychonius, especially the latter half of his life and his career. It makes it quite plausible that Benedict, views the church's internal enemies in a way that's deeply shaped by, I guess, Tychonian ecclesiology. But I will say this. Benedict is engaging with this view of ecclesiology, namely Tychonius, in the Theology of History in St. Bonaventure. He makes references to it in his book called The Communion. I think that's the 70s, and especially in the Jesus of Nazareth parts. So I don't think that Peter Thiel, or you who have read some of this, I haven't read any of it directly aside from the Jesus of Nazareth, and I frankly don't recall the references to Tychonius. It's not
I don't either. I read that too back when it came out, and I don't remember it either back then. I know it in hindsight.
We weren't looking for stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But so it becomes more interesting when connected with Benedict's repeated discussion of the two cities or the two bodies within the church. This is what you mean. This is the direct Tychonian stuff inherited through Augustine. A lot of scholars have argued, haven't they, that maybe it's fewer than I'm thinking, that Benedict's interpretation of Revelation, the Antichrist, maybe the Catechon, if we're going to the Joshua Charles stuff, in the church's final trial bears a distinctly Tychonian eschatology. Is that your, I mean, you were saying
I don't see any other way to see it, because we're actually watching that happen before our eyes, right? Like you can see, especially when you look to the popes of the after the Enlightenment, you have this series of popes who are constantly warning about this evil that is encroaching upon humanity, right? They're seeing Christendom disintegrate. They're seeing the church's temporal authority completely being demolished throughout the entire world, and they're warning about it over and over. You read every one of Leo XIII's encyclicals; they're all warnings about the cataclysm that's about to come upon humanity. You have Leo XIII having that vision of Satan and God giving him 100 years. And then when the council comes, all of a sudden these popes are like, let's stop with this prophets of doom stuff. Like it's just like this immediate change in attitude. And part of that, I think, is because, like, I think things were coming to a head with the temporal powers and the church to a degree to which I think the church had to compromise, just like Leo XIII made compromises throughout his papacy. Like his magisterium's impeccable, and you could go and you read his encyclicals, they're phenomenal, but the decisions he's making behind the scenes, not supporting some of these like Catholic, like there were, me and Rob talked about it last night, there were 3 attempts at building a Catholic polity based on Rerum Novarum, and he didn't support any of them. So it's like you see the church is wrestling with this stuff, and then the council comes and the church is just kind of like Paul VI laying down his papal tiara is one of those moments of this catacomb laying down his authority and giving it over to the world. You know, it's like it happens kind of in stages, in my opinion.
Yeah, a great image of synecdoche is Paul VI laying down his papal tiara. I agree. That's maybe the most fitting image for what's happening. Before, and on that note, before we get to eschatology in earnest, I think it fits well to just have a little bit of a conversation, a primer on what's a reasonable view of our post 20th century ecclesiology. And this is kind of what we were talking about yesterday, Anthony. It's like, I always say this, and I forget exactly where you are. You're pretty close to where I'm at, I think. I think pretty darn close, but just respond to this. I've never been with SSPX because I'm a Thomist philosopher. I'm not a theologian. That's philosophically incoherent, right? You can't have, as I've been saying the last month or so, it doesn't fit, it doesn't do well to have contradictions between major premise and minor premise. In other words, you can't have a Novus Ordo ecclesiology with a sedevacantist, obediential, what would you call that? Discipline. You can't have the obediential discipline of sedevacantism, but to have that, you need a sedevacantist ecclesiology. So you can't say, well, it's the real church still. It's not just some ape church, but I'm not going to obey it. Like, they can pound sand.
People get mad at me for this, but I view obedience to bishops the same way I view like a wife's obedience to her husband. Like the wife's obedience to her husband is not conditional upon the husband being Christ-like. like it's just not. Like you have to. So like there's this whole thing going on right now about everybody saying like certain people got a call from Mueller or from Burke when Leo was elected and they stood down because of that. And I'm like in reality, if Burke called me and told me don't say, like, I don't know, man, that's a pretty big person to call me for me to not obey. Like, I just view obedience to bishops the same way I would view my wife's obedience to me. Like, it's not conditional upon me being nice or me like, she has to obey me. It is what it is, even when I suck.
Yeah, of course. Oh, well, it's not. That's not your private pious opinion or something like that. There are 12 New Testament passages on discipline, and pretty much all of them, I'd say 9 or 10 of them, I'd have to go back and check. I'm a little bit out of the patriarchy stuff because we've been covering other current events last few months. But yeah, all of them are, we have this bifurcated patriarchy in the church. There's a higher one and a lower one. And obedience is what makes the clerical patriarchy move. Obedience is what makes the household patriarchy move. And it is not conditioned on good behavior by the patriarch. It's an existential, ontological sine qua non. And yeah, I mean, hey, at least, and in some sense, in both patriarchies, by the way, clerical and household, you get to pick your boss. Or at least you get to pick the conditions for the possibility of having that boss. You don't have to go become a priest. If you can't deal with having a vow of obedience, which I really couldn't, I really wouldn't want one, and I couldn't, then don't become a priest. That keeps a lot of souls that might otherwise become priests out of the priesthood. And same thing for women. Yeah, you have to do everything your husband says, but you get to get married. Yeah, or you don't have to get married, or you don't have to get married to, I don't know, from Super Street Fighter, like a dictator that tells you at what time dinner has to come out. You marry a laid back guy if you want less rules. It's up to you. So, yeah. So I mean, ecclesiologically,
look, and not just that, like, okay. So, and the domestic patriarchy and the ecclesial patriarchy are facing the same dilemma right now, right? Like, you're dealing with feminism in the domestic patriarchy, and like synodality is this. It is the ecclesial form of feminism in the domestic, where it's like the father is supposed to be laying down the law, and instead he's like asking the wife, like, what do you think we should? You know what I mean? It's not.
It's mutual submission.
It's mutual submission. That's exactly what it is. It's instead of the father being the father, it's mutual submission, and the father's then giving the authority over to the laity, which is so disordered and preposterous,
Right. So I think we do pretty much look at this identically then. So I'm not an SSPX backer guy. They say recognize and resist. I'm like, well, recognize. That's always what I do. I just have this, flapping, gaping mouth hole that I've used for most of my life, for my career, and in various jobs. And so I recognize and I'll talk about stuff, but it's not up to me to resist any more than it is.
Dude, that is literally my position. I said, I'm not recognizing resist. I'm like, recognize and accept. Like, I don't know. Like, I got to deal with it. Like, it's not, I don't have a choice in this. Like, it sucks. Recognize and just suffer. Like, I don't know what to tell you
about it. Some recognize and
complain a little,
but yeah, create some awareness. But at the end of the day, they're like, oh, what are you, like a cuck? I'm like, bro, I mean, I live how I want to live. If there's some gay bishop, there are a lot of gay bishops. So there's some gay bishops out there that can control my life to the extent that I don't like a particular new liturgy that came about roughly in 1970, then I'm doing pretty well. You know, I control every other aspect of my life, and I have, you know, the amazing, excellent wife. So the self-determination is a big thing around here. But but also you make a lot of cracks on Twitter about the ecclesiology of sedes. We'll leave behind the society stuff, but sedes, you know, I've always said they don't suffer the same philosophical incoherence that society does, because there's not a contradiction between their premises. So they don't suffer self-contradiction, meaning there's not a 0% chance of this being a correct worldview. But it doesn't mean that their conditional premises are correct. I've always given sedevacantism roughly a 1% chance of being correct. And people are like, wow, that's a lot. I'm like, well, it's just what I think. I think there's about a 1%.
It's a possibility. Like,
because
it's
not a contradiction in your premises when you're not saying, you know, Socrates is a man, all men are immortals, therefore Socrates is amortal. You know, that's a contradiction in your premises. But yeah, there have been sedevacante periods that lasted 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 years when I did my deep dive on all the pontificates. I just don't see them letting us go, you know, this long under these conditions, but that's kind of speculative. But so the question is that you and I are really treating of here today, when you kind of strip away the brass tacks, when you do Husserlian phenomenological epoche, just sort of bracket all the shit, is okay, assuming that we're 99% sure sedes are wrong. I'm 100% sure SSPX is wrong. If the Pope's the Pope and this is the church, you got to obey. He says jump, you got to say how high, unless he says there's 4 persons in the Trinity or something. So what about the other 99%? And I think that's where our conversation yesterday on the phone, and Benedict and Tychonius and his Bonaventurian view on maybe eschatology, end of the world type stuff, becomes more relevant. Because all of this for the night, okay, assuming there's only 1% chance of sede, how do you describe the extra dark seculum obscurum we're in? We've had them before, but they weren't really quasi-doctrinal. They weren't like this. This is worse. It's dark. So, and it's lasting, you know, the other one, the seculum obscurum in the 900s lasted 68 years, which is exactly what it's been since the council. But this is worse. So how do you describe it? Well, it becomes really compelling if you say, in some sense, whether it's the last decade or whatever, last century, it's the last age of the world. And that's where it's like cue up all this Benedict stuff that for 4 decades, he seemed to really believe we are living in the last age of the world.
See, like the thing is, there's a tendency for every generation to think they're the last, right? So you have to be cautious of that. You have to be cautious of like apocalyptomania. But there's some things that are happening, and like the main thing that's happening is that like the people of the old covenant are gathered back into Jerusalem. Like, I think that is the biggest sign, because if you go like even to scripture where Christ in Luke says Jerusalem will be trodden underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. And also what you're seeing with the Assisi meetings, to me, this is what I said to you yesterday, was that what the church is essentially telling us, without even a conscious awareness of what they're doing. They think they're just going and saying, hey, you know, let's just go along to get along. But in reality, they're telling us the Great Commission is over. We're no longer going to convert these pagans. We're now just going to say we are one religion among all the religions, and we're just going to get along now. You have to think about what happens throughout Christian history. I mean, every single pagan nation was converted, except for the Jews. The Jews were the only ones that we made this exception for, and we allowed them to exist without converting them, because they existed as a signal people and as almost a witness to the truth of Christianity. So they exist as this nomadic people. They're never allowed to have their own homeland. They're scattered about the world. After the temple is destroyed. But every other culture we encounter, we launch missions to, and we try to convert them. And then all of a sudden we come to the council and the church has Nostra Aetate, and then they start having these Assisi meetings. So it's like, I said to you yesterday, it's almost like the hierarchy is reading the scriptures in some carnal way, like the Jews are, where the Jews see, they call it Zionism for a very specific reason, is because if you go to Psalm 2, or if you go to Isaiah, all of them, there's all these promises, but especially on Zion, that are given to David about God will send his son to rule over the nations and crush them with an iron rod. The Jews are still awaiting that, like on a very temporal level. So they're calling this Zionism because they're waiting for those promises at Zion to be fulfilled, where we as Catholics know those promises were fulfilled in the church through Christ. He is his son, and the nations do come and he crushes them with his rod, because when he is lifted up, all nations bow to him. He becomes the King of Kings, and kings of the earth worship the King of Kings. But the Jews are waiting for their Messiah. And so now our own hierarchy is with this whole Abrahamic faith house thing. They're doing the same thing. They're reading the scriptures in a carnal way, where they know there's supposed to be this unification of Jews and Gentiles at the end of the story, but they're trying to bring it about through a carnal way by just doing it through human fraternity instead of through conversion and bringing them in. Like, these men think like the Sanhedrin do, the current hierarchy. And it is apocalyptic. I don't know. I mean, there's really no other way to see it than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right to point out the Great Commission as being the sign of maybe the beginning of the end times. And this could be 200, 300 years.
Yeah.
But if you took a poll of all the world's bishops, and I know this is unfalsifiable, by the way, and you say, okay, your parishioners aren't going to see this, people in your diocese aren't going to see it, but just is the Great Commission practically and logistically extinct? I think 90% or better of them are going to say, yeah, everyone knows Jesus's name, and it's the time not for the Great Commission, which is the whole point of the church, aside from bringing the sacraments, administering the sacraments on a regular basis, meaning communion and confession mainly. The whole point of the church is the Great Commission, to bring the gospel, and no, that should not be dead. The church needs the gospel as much today as it did 2,000 years ago. But most of the bishops are going to say this piffle about meeting folks where they're at. And, that's what the whole project of the Spirit of Vatican II is. I think that's, in a slightly more faithful sounding way, what the new evangelization is. How can evangelization be old if you believe people just need it? And I think this is a great sign. Now, what other people will point at is the Jews have not all converted yet. That's like late final era. We're
that
early
happens
final.
after the Antichrist. That happens after the Antichrist.
Yeah, right. Right. But he'll emerge from their ranks, from their tribe or whatever. They all go back there first. You got the red heifer. You got the rebuilding of the third temple. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen. And then the Antichrist.
Yeah, but I think that stuff happens pretty successively quickly. I think like the Antichrist reigns for 3.5 years, right? So it's like, which goes to this idea of the catacomb also, like Cardinal Manning, which goes to the Sedevacantists thing also. Like, if they're saying there has been no pope for 68 years, that is the removal of the catacomb for 68 years. Where is the Antichrist? Like, he should have taken the stage by now, if that is the case. Like, Sedevacantism is a cute theory. It's a cute theory, but it's a theory. It's like, you can't prove it. There's no way to, like, okay, like, oh, John the 23rd was a Freemason, and now the sacraments are about, like, it's a cute theory, but that's all it really is. But if you go to the saints, and especially if you go to Cardinal Manning and read that book, like, Cardinal Manning is emphatic and Sedis love Cardinal Manning. I don't understand why. But Cardinal Manning is emphatic that the removal of the Pope from Rome is like immediately precedes the Antichrist, right? Now, even what we saw with this, like, recently, you saw this kind of debacle between Trump and Pope Leo recently. You remember in the news, it was like Pope Leo criticized the war in Iran and Trump kind of like lost his mind. Like, even as crappy as the modern hierarchy is, as crappy as our Pope is, as terrible as things are, like in some weird way, Leo is still a catechone and a restrainer, to the point where Trump loses his mind if Leo even slightly criticizes. And it was like the most mundane thing he said. He was like, like make peace, not war. You know, it was like some hippie shit. And it's like,
so hippie, yeah, so gay.
And like Trump like lost his mind over it. It just kind of shows that the Pope is still the restrainer in some sense.
So the view of the catechon, which comes from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verses 6 to 7, is, you think, an office thing, not a particular pope.
Correct. Like I think the removing of the catechon is not an immediate thing either. I think it's been happening. Like I think the first sign of it was Paul VI laying down his papal tiara. I think Benedict stepping down was another sign of it. The thing is, look, like Benedict did see this way. Okay. He did see like resigning his office as a laying down. Now, the thing is, Benedict is a bit of a modernist, not a bit. He was a modernist. He's like the reason the council happens the way it does. Yeah. And he also had free will. Like he was the Pope. He didn't have to leave us all these breadcrumbs and all these little like subtle things. He could have just come out and said what he thought. The buck ends with him. He's the Pope. He has the ability to make universal change within the church if he wanted to, and he never did. He just kind of left these little subtle like intellectual breadcrumbs for those who want to dig through his work over the course of his career. And it's like, you know, because I tried to give Benedict the benefit of the doubt when he stepped down and he said, I experienced it in a moment of prayer. The Lord told me to step down. And it's like, you try to extend as much charity as you can, but to the degree in which he abandoned us and left us to that vulture for 10 years, it's like it was like cruel to do to us.
Yeah, it's like a father that's a decent father. You know, we won't get into judging Benedict 16 right now, but for most of the time, he was only there for 8 years, but you're 8 years old with him. And he's been decent. He wasn't like abusive, and he leaves you. He's like, I better go. I don't think I have what it takes. I'm going to leave little Johnny, you know, and he puts his hand on his shoulder with his pipe. And he's like, sorry, bro, I gotta leave. Little Johnny
with an abusive stepfather.
Then the father's like, you know, molesting you or whatever. You know, analogically speaking, I'll take the pretty good guy for 8 years, and that was 13 years of Francis, by the way.
Yeah, it was brutal.
Let me read 2 Thessalonians because I think it's interesting, and you know what is now restraining him, so that he may be revealed in his time. For the mystery of lawlessness, that man of sin word, is already at work. Only he who now restrains it will do so until he is out of the way. So a lot of the early church fathers, Irenaeus, I think Tertullian, Chrysostom, Jerome, others have made quite a bit out of this and given us the context. And, you know, the person who put it on the map for me was Joshua Charles, a lot of people, because of that book. And it seems to be, so you're saying an official thing, an office-based thing, meaning if the sedes were right or became right, maybe not 1958 sedes, but to whatever extent a sedevacantists would ever be right, you would say that would be sort of part of the broader configuration of the way that things would unfold.
It's two things. It is the Roman system of governance, right? So it's like, it has something to do with the Roman Empire, but it is personified in the person of the Pope. So when you go to Cardinal Manning talks about how even when, because he's a contemporary of Newman, he's writing in the 1850s, and he's writing in England 10 years after they finally allow Catholicism to be legal in England again. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so much is being made of religious liberty, right? Like you have, this is the Enlightenment period. This is all this talk of religious liberty. And Cardinal Manning's like, yeah, they'll talk about religious liberty, but they still hate the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is not just about what you believe. It's a system of governance. Right. It's not like the Protestant sects. Like the Catholic Church has dominion over your will.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like the Protestant sects. You become whatever denomination, and you don't like what they say. It's like, all right, screw it, I'll go to another denomination. They don't have dominion over your will. The Catholic Church has dominion over your will. You have to submit to the Roman system of governance. They have the ability to enact canon law and all these different things. So, like, the Catholic Church has always been different in terms of this religious liberty thing, but in the person of the Pope, you have like the catacomb personified. So Cardinal Manning, he's like, and he talks a lot about the Antichrist too. And he's writing in the 1850s, and he's talking about how the Antichrist, he could see. He's writing right after the Papal States are taking over, and like there's so much going on in Europe during this time. But he's envisioning the Antichrist coming and calling the Jews back into Jerusalem. He couldn't have envisioned like the Jews gathering back into Jerusalem on their own, and then the Antichrist coming about that way, you know. But even like when you go to some of like the if you go to Akita, right? Like Benedict's always talking about Akita. He's talking about Fatima all the time. When he hears about Akita, he basically says, yeah, this is just a reiteration of Fatima. We're hearing the same things, and it has to do with the final things. And Akita is bishop against bishop, cardinal against cardinal, all that stuff. St. Cyril of Jerusalem is when was St. Cyril of Jerusalem? Early. He's a church father, right? He writes this. He says, we who are of the church seek the church's sign. The Savior says, and then many will fall away and will betray one another and will hate one another. If you should hear of bishops in conflict with bishops, clergy against clergy, and flock against flock, even unto blood, do not be troubled. It has been prophesied. Fix your attention not on the events themselves, but on the fact that they have been foretold. Like, you're going to be in a time where things seem so chaotic, and don't worry about that they're so chaotic. Just rest in the fact that this is all prophesied. Like, Christ told us this was going to happen. You should know, like, you should know that this was always the plan of God. So let me break some shit.
What, because you know the Cardinal Manning stuff. Didn't he say that wasn't his analysis of the catacomb like restricted to the Roman Empire and the ending of the Roman Empire?
No. Cardinal Manning saw it very much because the church kind of takes the place of the Roman Empire, right? Like the Roman Empire, the idea of Christendom, the way the early church envisioned it, kind of goes away in that, like, because the early church really did see one empire taking over and being Christendom. And then when the Roman Empire collapses, there's no more Caesars or emperors for them to make Roman like make Catholic like that. So they had to kind of like re-envision that. But the Catholic Church, as the Roman Empire collapses, you have Pope Gregory the Great stepping in, fixing the aqueducts, and then that's how the church acquires temporal power, and you get the Papal States and things like that. The church literally becomes the Roman Empire, and instead of Romulus and Remus, you now have Peter and Paul as the founders of the new Roman Empire. So Manning is seeing the church as the new Roman Empire. He's seeing that as the system of governance, and he's seeing the Pope in the person of the Pope, the catacomb personified.
Yeah, there's some famous quote attributed to him. I think it's accurate. It says something like the abandonment of Rome was the liberation of the pontiffs, because when everything was moving east to Constantinople and to Byzantium, then you had really the Roman Empire West more or less giving up then, even though it would last up to 900 more years, arguably longer than 900 more years. But they move over that way, and so the church is there for the people in a way. You're talking about administrative arm. It's not just the spiritual arm. Now it's the administrative arm for the western half of the empire. And you have all the emperors, governed from Byzantium, from Constantinople. And in some sense, this is what makes it eternal Rome, right? It wasn't eternal Rome if you're talking about Rome version 1. There's also Rome version 2, the Holy Roman Empire. And now after Holy Roman Empire, there's still eternal Rome, qua the Catholic Church. And I think that this is really what makes the topic so fascinating. If there's a suspension of the popes as defenders, not just spiritual defenders, but material defenders of Christendom, then someone's going to fill that void. Someone's going to fill that vacuum, and that person is the Antichrist.
Yeah, for sure. It's also not just Tychonius that kind of sees this way either, right? Like if you go to Cornelius a Lapide, like Cornelius a Lapide very much sees the Pope and the cardinals and bishops prefigured in the high priest and the Sanhedrin, right? Like he sees them as the prefigurement, like the Sanhedrin and the high priest as the prefigurement of the bishop and the cardinals. And when he's interpreting Apocalypse 9 is this: and the fifth angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. He opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and the shaft rose smoke like that of the great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke from the shaft, and then from the smoke came locusts on the earth, and they were given authority like the authority of scorpions on the earth. So the commentary on that, when the Christ finally appeared, the Jewish Sanhedrin turned the people of Jerusalem against him. They are the stars that fell from heaven and poisoned the waters. The high priest then led the assault on the Messiah and encouraged the false prophets. The high priest is the fallen star who opened the bottomless pit. The vision notes a period of exceptional gravity for the church. So that's the type. And then this is how it's going to be fulfilled. This vision notes a period of exceptional gravity for the church. A priest or bishop who teaches heresy can be compared to a star who falls from heaven, but in this case, the star refers to a particular person whose revolt from the church shall lead directly to the reign of Antichrist. And I saw an angel coming. So that's basically it. So it's almost like he's saying the Pope, because who has the keys? I mean, it could be the Pope that opens the key to the bottomless pit by leaving Rome or by something, right? And that is going to lead directly to the reign of Antichrist. Something to do with the Pope being the catacomb, the restrainer. Once he's taken away, that is opening the key to the bottomless pit, and that invites in the Antichrist. Like it's not like some wacky theory to think this. This is how the church has always kind of understood it. And what happened at the council is weird because the church stopped talking about eschatology totally, and they start talking about this new springtime and the new evangelization. But John Paul II, who's saying all these things, is also dropping these hints of the end of the world. And Benedict, who's saying the new springtime, the new evangelization, is dropping these hints about the end of the world the whole time. So it's kind of like this, like you were saying, like they're saying one thing, but they're signaling something totally different. While they're saying the one thing, they're signaling something else.
I want to ask you about Fatima Akita in a second, but real fast, a brief word from two sponsors. First off, you know that the strong first pillar of this channel is patriarchy. And as a household patriarch, the only way to know that your family is going to be safe is to be able to trust your neighbors. If you go to www.realestateforlife.org, then you can get out of your blue state, get to a red state, and then, and only then, you can know that you've chosen your state and you've chosen the best state, the most conservative and Christian state for your family. Well, I did it. I got out of the bluest of the blue. I got to the reddest of the red, and my family's never been happier. Go to www.realestateforlife.org. Now, the second component of this is your family's financial wellness, which can be burgeoned and added to and sustained through precious metals. If you go to St. Joseph Partners, they are the ones that sell gold, silver from literally a good Catholic. I just called to check up on my small portfolio about a month before I ended up deciding to work with these guys as a partner. I take on partners very reluctantly. Go to St. Joseph Partners today, and you know gold's very expensive, but it's probably going to get more expensive. Who knows? Silver is still reasonable, probably also going to get more expensive. It's a way to safeguard your family's financial well-being. Go there today to St. Joseph Partners. And of course, if you want to support this channel, like, subscribe, click the notification bell. And if you want to support further than that, locals, rules for retrogrades. Okay. And so Anthony, now we get back to my kind of hobby horse, which is Fatima Akita. And it becomes even stranger what we're talking about. These two men of contradiction, Pope John Paul II, a kind of action theory self-contradictor, and Pope Benedict XVI, a epistolary self-contradictor. But they're both men of great contradiction. And I find that this theme holds strong in the realm of Fatima and Akita. Even I don't know where you're at on Garabandal, but even if you extend a lot of those ideas into Garabandal, maybe into, remember the Our Lady of All Nations, I believe, is the wooden statue that was crying at Akita. So is that some sort of heaven sent ratification of Our Lady of All Nations? I don't know, but there seems to be a connection between these four Marian apparitions. And John Paul II is real strange on them because he's easy to mistake as the Pope, the bishop dressed in white. And of course, Benedict read The Secret, the third secret of Fatima. He knows where it is. Half the time he seems to be saying it's a message of apocalypsis. The other half the time he doesn't, but he says it's not yet fulfilled. So what the hell does it have to do with all of this?
Do you have the Benedict's response? I have it here. So somebody asked him, Your Holiness, what meaning do the Fatima apparitions have for us today? Is it possible to your mind to include in that vision the sufferings of the church today for the sins involving the sex abuse of minors? Benedict says, beyond this great vision of the suffering of the Pope, which we can in the first place refer to John Paul II, which is the official translation that the Vatican gave us, right? An indication is given of realities involving the future of the church, which are gradually taking shape and becoming evident. So it is true that in addition to the moment indicated in the vision, there is seen the need for a passion of the church, which naturally is reflected in the person of the Pope. Yet the Pope stands for the church, and thus it is sufferings of the church that are announced. The Lord told us that the church would constantly be suffering in different ways until the end of the world. As for the new things which we can find in this message today, there is also the fact that attacks on the Pope and the church come not only from without, but the sufferings of the church come precisely from within the church, from the sin existing within the church. This too is something that we have always known, but today we are seeing it in a really terrifying way, that the greatest persecution of the church comes not from her enemies without, but arises from sin from within, which is literally the Tychonian theory right there, right? Like, right. Look, okay, so in the end, if you see it typologically, it has so much to do with the synagogue of Satan that John is writing about in the Apocalypse, right? So even if you go to Apocalypse 3, verse 9, I think John says, those who say they are Jews, but who are but are not. He's talking about the synagogue of Satan. I will make them bow to you at the end of time. Like the synagogue is going to bow to the church in the end, okay? Which is kind of like an inversion of the prophecy in Isaiah, where Isaiah says the nations will bow to Israel. Like John's flipping that prophecy on its head and saying, no, it's going to be the synagogue that bows to the nations, because the nations were the ones who worshiped Christ. Now, man, I just lost my train of thought.
Oh, it's the word. People don't know till they've live streamed how it doesn't happen that often. You're pretty good with it.
Okay, I got it. So typologically, just as the synagogue crucifies Christ, there's going to be an element where the synagogue crucifies the true church, but there's also going to be an element where this body of the devil that is within the church is going to assist the synagogue in the persecution of the church. Right. We witnessed this in our lifetimes during COVID. During COVID, the synagogue comes out with this medicine that tell everybody this medicine is going to fix it, and the church literally endorses this thing and colludes with the synagogue, and the true church is then told to do this thing. Like, we live through a type of how this story plays out in our own lifetimes. Like, it's not that crazy to think that this is how the story plays out in the end, because we all experienced it. So in the end, you're going to have this body of the devil that masquerades as the church. These are people who say they are not John saying those who say they are Jews and are not. It's those who say they are Catholics and are not.
Yeah. This is a strong point. Yeah, you made this on the phone when we were talking yesterday, and I think this is pretty. I mean, if the clot shot people can be like univocally associated with synagogue of Satan, Jewry, it's a lot of overlap. It's not, perfect one-to-one, but then I like the theory. And I do just say, it's not even a theory, it's a typology. And I like it. I think it works. Yeah, it's a type. So look, I like all this stuff. I think it all jives. It all works well. But here's the big question, sort of the this is the upward force. Now here's the downward force. How does this idea of the passion of the church, which follows typologically the passion of Christ, how does that, with its ugly ending, comport with the concept of indefectibility and notional gates of hell not prevailing?
This is where SETEs and the SSPX all get hung up. Like, look, and it's a good, like it really is important, right? Like, the church before the council is saying one thing, and now after the council, the very things that Pope Leo is warning about and Gregory the 16th is warning about, the church is screaming from the rooftop saying, we need to do this thing. Right? They're talking like religious liberty and religious indifferentism, and all religions are on this. Like, these are the things the popes are warning us about before the council. And then after my position is that the church, indefectibility means the church can never bind you to something that will affect your salvation. Like, they can't bind you to something, right? So believing in religious liberty in terms of how the church had to see it is because they're seeing it from like an American standpoint, where it's like, okay, look, if we support this religious liberty thing, like, we can exist in these countries. Because if we try to say we are the one true church and like what people want, like the trad mind thinks if we just had a good pope and we just fixed the liturgy, everything would be okay. I'm sorry to tell you guys this. There was a perfect liturgy and there were phenomenal popes leading up to the council, and this stuff still happened. So that doesn't fit. This is not an issue of fix the pope, fix the liturgy, problem solved. It's a problem of men's hearts. Like, men's hearts need to be converted.
Both Anthony and I also think there's plenty of evidence for causation, not just correlation, that Vatican II made things way worse. So we're not, this isn't a cope, because we're both pretty friendly to that perspective that the new mass added to the acceleration. It's turbo cancer, which is what the clot shot did. But yet you can't deny that, like, Pius X is the one that started the liturgical reforms through the total gutting of the breviary. Mm-hmm. And Pius XII with the with the
Easter liturgy, with the Triduum.
Yeah, these are some of the good guys. So what? But here, wait, I want to take you back a second, because it's not that easy. I agree with everything you're saying, but I'm just saying there are conceptual difficulties, so that we're not being facile here or glib. Yes, the church can never bind us propositionally to something false, and never will, but ex ante or ex post. In other words, like, if ex ante, the church can't bind us to something like saying there are 4 persons in the Trinity, does that mean that if a pope plans to pen a document tomorrow saying there are 4 persons in the Trinity, he'll get like an aneurysm and fall dead?
Yeah, that's what I think.
Or ex post, he might do it, but then we get into a Bellarminian Francis Xavier theoretical.
Tim, listen to me. All of the freaking SETEs have been saying forever that, oh, that's it. They're gonna the next thing is gonna be they make women priests. The church cannot do it. Like, it's just, I still think the Holy Spirit protects the church from binding us to something that will lead us to hell. So it's like, if you believe in religious liberty, that's not going to affect your salvation. The church still teaches you need to remain in a state of grace and die in a state of grace. You still have the sacraments. Like, those are the essentials of the Catholic faith that the church cannot upend. Like, when they submitted the dubia about the blessing of same-sex unions, they said, no, the church cannot bless sin. Then Francis, like, he's the Pope. If he wanted to literally make gay marriage, which he did, these men want to make gay marriage, okay? Like, they want to, they do. You think it's just a little pushback from the trads that's stopping them? It can't just be that.
No, we're of the same mind here. And it's a really strong point. They are like the madman who's gained power, these recent popes, and their finger is hovering over the panic button. They're just itching to push it, and for whatever reason they can't. So that is a kind of ex ante catechon rather than an ex post one. But here's a question: what of Nostra Aetate? That is the closest thing we have to a constitutional crisis at Vatican II. What of, I'm even more convinced this is a bigger deal. What of Amoris Laetitia, chapter 8? That's a constitutional crisis. That's there in the AAS on the books. I'm not asking as a know-it-all. I'm saying there has to be some element of, we're not bound to it in a kind of ex post invisible propositional way as well.
But that's kind of what I mean by they can't like you.
Yeah,
Francis couldn't even bind the priests to force them to do this. Like he couldn't even do that. He had to say, he basically, like he wanted to make divorced and remarried people able to receive this, and he had to commit it to some footnote, and he couldn't even tell his priests, you must give communion to these people. He basically had to say, look, if you guys find some way that you can make your consciences feel okay about this, go ahead. You know, I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you. I do agree with you. Believe me, I think it's catastrophic, but
I think we're agreeing 100%, which is rare on my show. But I am saying, remember, a lot of people have forgotten this. He was doing that and sort of dicking around April, May, June, July. It was in September that the Buenos Aires bishops said, we think it means you're saying give communion to unrepentant adulterers, divorced and remarried. And he said, yes, that's the only correct interpretation. The same day, he stuck it in the acta. So that has to be revisited. I'm not saying that busts the church. I'm just saying there has to be some combo of ex post protection that we,
or the Antichrist has to come, and then there has to be a restoration of Peter at the end of the story in some way, right? Like, dude, we went through the Jewish stuff is so freaking important. It's not just about like people really need to understand how important this is. This is Tim. This is from the beginning of the story in Genesis 3:15 when God says, I will put enmity between your seed and the woman's seed, right? Mm-hmm. Jesus in Matthew 22 or 23, I think Matthew 23, goes to the Pharisees and he's like, you serpents, you brood of vipers. He's associating them with the serpent from the garden, right? You serpents, you brood of vipers, how will any of you escape damnation? And he basically tells them, you have one generation to repent. And if not, you're going to be like, I'm going to send you prophets, I'm going to send you scribes, and you're going to kill some of them. You're going to throw them off the top of the temple roof, but you still have a generation to repent. And if you do not, judgment will come upon you, and your children and your children's children will pay for this, because you have built God's wrath up, right? So the destruction of the temple, this curse goes to the Jews. So everything we're seeing in our modern, like this conversation that is happening, like this is not an accident that we're all talking about Zionism, that we're all talking about the Jews. Like this stuff is super important that this is happening. Today, Netanyahu is calling Israel the third temple. Like this stuff really is important. And there is going to be some figure that comes that they worship as their Messiah. And the freaking Christian Zionists are going to go right along with it, because every one of the church fathers said the heretics are going to greet, like throngs of heretics are going to greet him as if he is the second coming. And it's like, we have to be super aware of this stuff. And look, even the Tychonius stuff, like Tychonius, one of the main points he makes is that this body of the devil, look, we have to, in the Lord's passion, we have to suffer as the Lord does, which means we have to be handed up to the religious authorities the same way Christ was, right? So we're going to be handed up to our own religious authorities who are colluding with the synagogue, and we have to suffer, right? The Tychonius makes this point that we should flee this, and that at the end of the story, if you read in the Apocalypse, Christ says, come out of her, my beloved, so that you do not partake of her blasphemies, right? There's going to be this time when the church does, when Christ separates the wheat from the chaff, and you do have to separate the body of the devil from the body of Christ. The Sedes are making the same mistake Tychonius did in that they're separating themselves too soon. Tychonius did this too. Like the Sedes are Donatists. They don't want to mix in with the dirty church, and they don't want, it's a really like apt comparison of what Tychonius saw as he had to flee these bishops who pinched, or even Christians who pinched incense to Caesar and then repented afterward, after Christianity was made legal. Like he wanted nothing to do with these people. You have to flee from their iniquity. And that's what the Sedes are doing. But there's going to come a time, just like after, when you have the people of God in the old covenant, after Christ rises from the dead, Christ says, come out of her, my beloved, so you don't partake of her blasphemies. And the Jews are Christian, and Christians are separated, right? And then all of a sudden you start seeing Christians saying, all right, we're not going to have our Sabbath on Saturday. We're going to have it on Sunday because we want to separate ourselves from them. The synagogue of Satan is a big part of that, is because the synagogue would accuse the Christians to the Romans of not because only the Jews had this exemption where they didn't have to worship the Caesars, right? So the Jews would go to the Romans and accuse them of like they're telling the Romans they're not us and they're not worshiping Caesar, and then the Romans would come in and persecute the Christians, and that whole thing gets flipped on its head, and then the Romans come in and destroy their temple and kick them out. It's a really amazing story that happens. It's like crazy. So and
it's liturgical. It's because we were seen as a vestige of Judaism, the the early way, and even by the end of the 1st century. So it is interesting that it's like we're the other monotheists. We're gonna worship on Sunday, not Saturday, and that's really where we started saying, "Yo, that there's a new monotheism in town, and we're gonna stand up for ourselves." And we did it a lot better than of course they could do. But here, this is the thing that, because I feel like we are sort of just doing glancing blows, because I don't do like 3-hour pods usually. It's
also such a dense topic. It's like a super dense topic, man. It's
both deep and broad. So you could go deep on any one of these points, but the Israel thing is, everyone's talking about it now, and I like what you keep coming back to, and you're like, look, this isn't a coincidence. We're talking about all these things. Even the people that talk about them in a gossipy, superficial, sort of numbskulled way, it's still, I hate to be Hegelian, it's a phenomenology of Geist thing. It's a phenomenology of spirit. This is where we are. We're here now. And that's why even the dummies are talking about the right issues. They're just not saying the right things. But this is where I think, I told you yesterday, I wasn't going to say this, but I end up usually saying everything that I've been thinking as I go live. And I said, it's not really a change in topic. This is why I do think the Charlie Kirk stuff is so important. When we're talking about Israel, when we're talking about, the synagogue of Satan, the killers of the prophets, we're talking about people, a group of people, a tribe of people that do not hesitate to kill the prophets. Do you think they're going to hesitate to kill you, little old?
No, they're going to persecute the church. Look, you've talked about this a lot on your show, man, which is this idea of the elder brother. The whole Old Testament, the golden thread throughout the entire Old Testament is one series of another of the eldest son is supposed to get the inheritance. Right? It's like that is the oldest son gets the inheritance, and it's one story after another where Cain kills Abel, then you go to Jacob and Esau, and it's Esau is the father's favorite and the blessing goes to Jacob, but there's this unification at the end. The same thing with Joseph and his brothers. Joseph's the youngest, and he winds up becoming the ruler of the Gentiles. He's a type of Christ. Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, Israel is my firstborn son. Right? Like tells Pharaoh, Israel is my firstborn son, implying that the nations are God's secondborn son, right? The whole, every story in the, every one of Christ's stories that every one of his parables, that's the word I was looking for. I can't believe I forgot it. Every one of his parables, even when you go to the prodigal son, is about the older brother is angry, the younger brother gets the blessing. Like this is such a consistent theme, and the whole entire thing is, the point of it is that Israel was supposed to get the blessing and it ends up going to the Gentiles. But there is this unification of the brothers at the end. There is going to be a conversion of Jews at the end, but it's not going to come like we're just in the stage where Cain kills Abel right now, and that's going to continue until the end of the story. The end of the story is where they realize the errors of their ways, and they are going to bow before the church because they are going to say, long have we not recognized you, and we've had their Messiah all this time.
And the point you kept making yesterday, I'm making your point, but it's easy to forget now. It was really you that made me see this. The main error of religious indifferentism of the post-conciliar church, of guys like John Paul II and Benedict XVI, is by assuming that because there's the eventual reconciliation of the older brother who screwed it all up, they screwed the pooch, the Jews, and the younger brother, the Christians, because there will be an eventual one, and we know how that typology ends, that we're going to be reconciled, that we're just cool with meeting them with it where they're at. And that's not correct. The reason we're cool, eventually we'll be cool, we know the terminus, is because the Jews will convert en masse, and if they don't, then they're lost, right? That's the reason we're cool. But we're not. It's not okay to just skip that middle step and say, well, we know that Jews are the older brother. They're important in salvation history. They're the archetype of the Christian, and therefore they're all good. It's like, well, no one's all good if they don't have Jesus, man. This is like the Bishop Barron fallacy.
Yeah, look, you when you had Ripperger on, you guys were talking about, you were going through like all the early popes who, when like Herzl came to Pope Pius the 12th or whoever it was, and he was like, we want to start this movement where we move back in, and he was like, well, we can never bless this movement, but we'll send missionaries in to convert you guys. Like the reason the church could never support a movement of Jews back into Israel because of the apocalyptic implications of it. Like there are apocalyptic implications to those people being back in that land, and they have a mind to dominate the world. Like this whole idea of their Messiah was never about bringing like us to become Jews. That's not what they want. They want us to worship the Jews. They want to rule the nations with an iron rod. Like, so man, there's a book, the Iron Scepter of the Son of Man, by, oh man, I forgot who it was from. The Iron Scepter of the Son of Man. And I forgot the author's name. Josh is going to kill me for this, but he tells the whole story of when Christ holds up the coin, right? And they're like, oh, whose image is, who should we pay taxes to Caesar? And Christ holds it up. He says, whose image is on this? The irony of that whole story is that Israel had to go to Rome and allow them to mint this coin, and they couldn't mint the temple coin, which was a temple half shekel, because Rome would not allow them to have their own currency. So they make this deal with Rome where they have to mint a coin with the image of Baal on it. So like, and it all has to do with the court of the Gentiles. This idea of allowing the Gentiles into the court of the Gentiles infuriated the Jews so much that they were willing to worship Baal with the temple coin rather than allow the Gentiles to come into like it infuriated them. That's what they killed Christ, not because of the parables he told. They killed Christ because Christ told them the Gentiles would be equal with them in the kingdom. Like this infuriated them. They're like, what do you mean the Romans who've enslaved us are going to be equal with us in the kingdom? That is why they killed him, because they hate the Gentiles. Like it is just, they hate the Gentiles. They still hate the Gentiles. So the church has basically told us for the past 60 years, look upon the Jews without suspicion because of the Holocaust. Like we have to love the Jews just like we love everybody else. The Jews are not told to stop looking upon us with suspicion. They still look upon us with that same suspicion they have always looked upon us. So they're plotting and scheming against us while we're going, no, love your neighbor. Do unto others as you wish them to do to you, because they have disarmed us. And this teaching that the church has always held through, when you went through Chrysostom and you go through all those church fathers and you're going through all the pre-conciliar popes, what they're saying about this stuff, that teaching is the teaching that the post-conciliar popes have forgotten. They've let their guard down, and the synagogue is going to be the thing that undoes us.
Amen. That book is St. Cyril of Jerusalem. I think it's a catechetical lecture or something. St. Cyril of Jerusalem that you're looking for. That's interesting. It's all good typology, man. Connected to the prophecy of Psalm 2, like you said, you shall rule them with a rod of iron. That's why I guess you let down Joshua Charles. That's good stuff, though, man. And look, do we have some calls, Steffi?
Yep,
there, we'll take some.
We'll read some super chats too.
But I mean, the weird thing is, you got Peter Thiel, Mr. Gay, barely.
Yeah, to bring it back to him, right?
He's queuing all this up. He's teeing all this shit up. I don't think so. I think this is a protesting too much situation. But it's very
so weird that he was talking about Benedict, because all of this stuff, like I've been like just fascinated with this whole time, especially the like. If all right, so somebody asked like how like to follow me. If anybody wants to do like a deep dive on this topic, we did an episode breaking down Scott Hahn's lecture series on Romans 9 through 11, and we go through the story of the entire Old Testament and lead it right up through Zionism. It is one of the best episodes we've ever done. We just did this, the whole story of how the Jews are going to betray us, and it's happened. It's like written from the beginning of time, from the fall. So if anybody wants to do like a deep dive on this topic, just look up Romans 9 through 11, Scott Hahn or something, and you'll find that episode. It was like, I learned so much listening to this. And it's, what's interesting is like, Scott Hahn made me an anti-Semite, like if you want to get down to it, because he's the one who's showing me that like, if you don't really understand what, look, you in Nostra Aetate, they highlight that Paul brings up the gifts and the gifts and the promises are not revoked, right? Like that's such a big thing that Nostra Aetate makes a big deal out of, right?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Paul is saying this, right? Okay, so Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles, right? He's not the apostle to the Jews. And this Paul is so well versed in the Old Testament, you would think God would make him the apostle to the Jews, but he doesn't. He makes him the apostle to the Gentiles. Paul comes into the scene and he's losing his mind in Romans 9 through 11 because he's seeing what God did. Now, God makes all these promises to reunite the 12 lost tribes. Okay, so if you understand what happens in the Old Testament, the 10 northern tribes break off from the southern 2 tribes. When we say Jews, we're talking about the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. The 10 northern tribes get dispersed when the Assyrian kingdom comes in and destroys them because they're worshiping idols. God makes a promise that he's going to reunite the 12 tribes of Israel. They're scattered amongst the Gentiles, these 10 northern tribes, so much so that they are Gentiles, Tim. Like they are Gentiles, like they're lost. Nobody knows where they are. Paul becomes the apostle to the Gentiles, and he realizes by preaching to the Gentiles, he is now reuniting the 12 lost tribes into the new covenant because those 12 lost tribes are scattered amongst the Gentiles. And he's saying the gifts and the promises have not been revoked because the Jews that are not the Jews, the Israelites who were scattered amongst the Gentiles are now coming into the covenant with Christ. And that is how God reunites the 12 lost tribes. And he's saying, like, he's like exuberant as he's writing this. And we look at it today and we're like, oh, God never revokes the gifts and the promises. It's like, no, he never revoked them. Paul is saying, I am a Jew. Of course he didn't revoke the promises. I was given the promise as a Jew. But that has nothing to do with today, the modern state of Israel, modern Jews. It has to do with the 12 lost tribes of Israel that are scattered amongst the Gentiles, that Paul, being an apostle to the Gentiles, is bringing into the new covenant. It's like, it's really phenomenal what God did, because the Jews of Paul's time think it's impossible to fulfill that promise. They're like, this is impossible. You cannot fulfill this promise. And Paul's like, you don't even know what God's up to right now. Like, God's doing something insane right now. It's like, so for us, like in our day, we're like, Jesus promised the gates of hell will not prevail. And we're looking at this current situation. We're like, holy crap, the gates of hell will prevail. It's like, just sit and wait. God's going to do something so insane. Your minds are going to be blown, guys. I promise.
Yeah, he writes straight with crooked lines.
Yeah,
that's good stuff, man. That's good stuff. All of this to say, an hour 20, hour 22, to say we don't really know what's going on.
So God do what he does, man. God's gonna do something cool. Don't worry.
That's all we needed to say, I guess. All right.
First super chat from JD. 2 of the top G's getting together. Love it. EMJ mentioned he thought Benedict was passive aggressive. Is that the position you guys have examined?
Well, in what context? Be passive aggressive.
So EMJ said that on my show, and I was like, really? Like I never like thought of it that way, but like he kind of like EMJ is the one who told me that like Benedict's the one who changed all the schemas at the council, and it's like he goes in and he does this thing, like, you know, and he's like, I mean, he described him as passive aggressive. I was just kind of like, I was like, wow, that's interesting. I never thought of it. I just never thought of it that way. But EMJ, you know,
the late Benedict, you'd say, well, definitely passive. I guess there's an aggression in activism to what the young Ratzinger was up to. And when people do have to remember, this is basic, but Vatican II was supposed to be the continuation of, drumroll, Vatican I, meaning Vatican I had ended before we had the definitive adumbration of the powers of the bishops. We got the power of the Bishop of Rome laid out, and then the Franco-Prussian War breaks out, and we don't get really finally listed out what we only have at Vatican I, in the words of Bishop Gasser's intervention. That's supposed to be Vatican II, but it's two men, two Germans, Karl Rahner and Joseph Ratzinger, that take what's supposed to be Vatican I continued, and they just say, let's just do a whole new aggiornamento thing. So Benedict's never off the hook in my book for that. And there is a kind of passive aggression to that.
No, like I said, he had free will. He didn't need to do this stuff like with his little breadcrumbs leaving for us. And I think he never should have stepped down. Like, it's like, I could look at what he did and be interested in it, though. It's like, I'm not endorsing what he said. I'm just saying this is what he believed. Like, the guy clearly believed this stuff. And it's like, you know,
for sure. No. And I think that I don't think he was playing 4D chess. And just by covering what Benedict believed doesn't mean I'm endorsing it, because I actually don't. But, and I'm with you, man. I'm with you on 100% of everything you said. Like, if he really cared about this stuff, if he really wanted to do the reform of the reform, just do it, man.
Yeah.
You're the
Pope. You're the freaking Pope. Do whatever you want to do.
It's like Fuentes's fever dream of first we have to get power, then we can, as soon as we get power, we can do everything we want. Well, in the Catholic Church, when you have a pope that supposedly wants to reform the reform and go back and do all that, you've already accomplished step one. Now it's just step two: snap your fingers and get what you want. Your edict.
You have a monarchy. We're the last monarchy on earth that like functions like this,
right? So it's quite a shame that he didn't. And you can only really assume that he wasn't one of us as much as people want to believe. But just a little thing. I think the Ratzinger-Rahner intervention, it became de verbum, but I think it was a more comprehensive redux of whatever was going on. But I have to be precise there. Okay, next question.
And we will take calls. Let's just get through some of these super chats. JD also said, Rod Dreher wrote an article right after Benedict passed that mentioned that he thought we were in the time of Antichrist.
Yeah. In a more general sense, though, like Benedict also said a lot of things like you could see the spirit of Antichrist coming, and like he saw it as like, if you don't go along with the current thing, like society will excommunicate you. Like this anti-church was basically society. Like if you don't endorse gay marriage, they'll excommunicate. And we saw that with cancel culture and stuff. He wasn't wrong about that, Benedict, when he was talking about that stuff.
Yeah. Also, Rod Dreher's a dork, and he left. So he's dead to me.
Justin said philosophically,
he wears dorky glasses. I don't like him.
Philosophically, do you believe it to be possible for the Antichrist to be something other than a single person, like an ideology or a theology of its own that influences multiple individuals?
Now, it can be, the Antichrist can be multifarious, and there can be an analogy, but as an analogate, it has to be a man. The man.
Yeah, there is a spirit of Antichrist, which is basically what Benedict was just saying. Like the spirit of Antichrist kind of like overtakes formerly. Like you have to think about, we are the former nations of Christendom. Like when we fall, it's worse than the pagan nations because we once worshipped the true King of Kings. So when we fall, it's like a worse fall. So this spirit of Antichrist definitely overtakes our society, but then there is definitely a particular person of the Antichrist that's coming.
Okay, let's see here. Moving on to the next one. Something is amiss. We don't want to basically accuse, but this cannot be correct.
I don't know what that's in reference to.
I'm not sure what that is.
Something's amiss. Something's afoot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I got plenty of stuff wrong tonight. I'm the smartest.
Are you talking about us?
Something's amiss.
I think he just means, there's a good something's misplaced on the mantle.
Okay, and then let's bring James in for a call. Let me add you to
bring James in for a
little
James,
chat. How are you?
A little chit chat.
Three paisans assembled.
You've been on my show, haven't you, James?
I have.
Yeah.
Someone's got to come in here and present the Sede Vacantis view, and you guys are saying it's only 1% possible. 1%.
You're lucky.
I thought you were a lawyer. What kind of evidentiary evaluation is this? Far higher than 1%.
I was stretching upwards to give you a whole percentage. Yeah.
I mean, so just I have a few like random points. you guys can ask or, do whatever you want to do with it. But I think first, I think you can demonstrate and can prove the sede vacantis position by using the canons of the church, by using defined dogma and being able to clearly recognize. I mean, if you want to go simple, just look at Pius X. I mean, he's identifying who the modernists are, calls it the synthesis of all heresy, which is a big statement when you think about heresy. Kind of marks the whole, trajectory of church history and the different councils that crop up. So to call that the synthesis of all heresy, you read what he says about the modernists and you compare it to the Vatican II sect. I mean, it doesn't get more descriptive. It's directly on point. So
something funny is Benedict even said how we're dealing with modernism. Like Benedict was warning about modernism as he himself is a modernist.
Yeah. Well, and that goes to your guys' point about, I mean, Benedict and John Paul II, the whole thing about the end times is it's a spiritual deception. It's deceptive. That's why they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth. That's why they're saying certain things, doing other things, and vice versa. So it's not surprising that, Benedict's going to, I'm dealing with the modernists. We got to be careful of them. Well, he himself is one. It's a form of deception.
I also love Teilhard de Chardin, and like he was like he really like pushed that whole like evolution of all creation type of thing. But I'm just I know what you're saying. I still think it's a cute theory. It's just a theory, though, man. And I grant that like it is possible. Like it's possible. I don't know.
I think it's more. I mean, it depends on the evidentiary burden. It's like if we're going preponderance, I think it easily meets that. It's more likely than not. I don't think it's just a possibility. And that's. I mean, how much more evidence do we need? You can see all the acts of apostasy. Like, what is the actual evidence you guys are looking for? That'd be my question.
Your position. This is where I disagree with it. Like, I do not believe that. Without like a canonical trial or like, I don't think that somebody personally believing something heretical invalidates their office or invalidates the sacraments. They, like, I think there has to be some kind of a canonical process. So I just don't see where, and there's also, I mean, I get to do, this is a whole show.
Yeah, it becomes its own show. But James, let me ask you, there's still the sticky business of applying the law to the facts. And what you came in here tonight saying is because Pius X said that this coming set of confusions can be known as the synthesis of all heresies, modernism kind of groups a lot of them into itself. QED, the church is over, or whatever said the sedes of invacante. That just doesn't, the evidentiary bar, that doesn't follow at all. The evidentiary bar has to be a lot higher than that.
Well, I'm giving you a conclusory statement. I'm not going through and presenting all of the evidence piece by piece, which we could do. I admit that's just a conclusory statement to say, well, he says synthesis of all heresies modernist, and I'm saying they're modernist. Yeah, that's a conclusory statement. It has to be demonstrated, but I think it can be.
But his whole point was that, remember, he was reacting to things that had been happening for the past 40 years.
Yes. Well, and this is where
the church,
and there were tons of bishops and priests within his own time who believed these things, who he was warning. So were they no longer in their office? Like, did they lose their office for believing those things?
Yeah, I want to respond to what you said there about the losing of the office piece, because there's a conflation between canon law and divine law. It's true that you would want, and typically you would have canon law processes playing out, but sins against the faith, like heresy, these are governed by divine law as well. So the falling from the office, if you look at Bellarmine, for example, we're not talking about secret heresy, occult heresy. We're talking about public heresy. And so when people are being publicly heretical, and the precedent, you can go back to Nestorius, and in the papal statements about Nestorius, it's clear that it says from the moment that he begins preaching the heresy, that is when he loses his office. So the public manifestations of heresy, of apostasy, teaching that, which it's all over the place. You got the Assisi prayer meeting. We get all the false religions coming in. You got John Paul II and all of his teachings. I can go on and on, but I want to focus on John Paul II because I do think that a very strong case can be made that he was the Antichrist. And that's because the Antichrist is identified in Scripture as in a particular way. And so he who dissolveth Christ is Antichrist. And we see again with Nestorius, he is sort of connected to this Antichrist idea because he dissolves Christ in his heresy. John Paul II does the same thing, teaching basically everyone's Jesus Christ. So that is the defining feature. I think with the other piece, and I'm jumping around here a bit, but
James, we don't have time for a last piece, but answer that. This is the last thing. This is important. We don't have time for another avenue, but answer this. So here's my contention. Tell me how you respond to the specific call of the question at the end of this. Pius believed that as of 1907 Pascendi, modernism had already made serious inroads into the church. It held institutional power, meaning priests, seminary professors, scholars, theologians. It had already, was prevailing. What's the definitive moment by which, and he wasn't saying the church is over, and that's why 3 years later he wrote the Oath Against Modernism. So we're talking 1907 and 1910. The modernists are winning. What's the definitive moment where it means, where you can define where he would point, if Pius X were alive today, and say, this is where they won?
I think you'd have, if you're going to pick one point in time, you'd have to go to the election of John the 23rd, because that is the apex. Or sorry, go ahead. Am I misunderstanding your question? What'd you say?
No, I'm saying you have to say it's that, but literally with the election itself, because you're a 1958 setting. So
I think it's that, because it entails a few things. Like, one, it's the culmination of what you're alluding to, which is not just that something that happens overnight in 1958, the core heresy that gets embraced, that I think what Pius X is talking about is, by the enemies being inside the church and seeing the weakness and they're exploiting that. What does that really mean? What's that saying? I think that that's actually touching on the salvation dogmas, that they, by coming in and understanding these ideas of invincible ignorance, baptism of blood, baptism of desire, that they're able to twist these to the point where you get universalism, where it doesn't really matter what you believe at all. And that's a defining feature of modernism. And even the false trads basically believe the same thing. That's something that had been around for a long time and was growing and spreading. That then takes its final form, though, when it goes back to the Freemasons and their ideas. They say in the Alta Vendita, they wanted a man sitting on the chair, right? That's the culmination of the ideologies, everything, and it entailed within that is the very first thing that John the 23rd does, which is, let's call a council and let's just redefine everything. Let's say we adore God with the Muslims. Let's say the Jews are not to be presented as rejected. Let's say that there's a way of illumination, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the one point.
In the Alta Vendita, they specifically said they didn't want a man sitting on the chair. By the way, they wanted a council of infiltrators. But and also, I would just say, look, these are good comments. And when I'm talking to a sede, thanks for your comments, James. We can go to the next comment. When I'm talking to a sede, the difference,
thanks, James.
If it were, we weren't debating, we're just talking. But the difference is, it wouldn't be a debate against someone that I'm 100% sure is right. I'm 99% sure. If I'm talking to an ortho bro, I have lots of them in my audience, I get along with them great. Or an SSPX, I have a lot of them in my audience, I get along with them great. Or an atheist or something like that, I don't tend to get along with them. I'm 100% sure those parties are right. So there is some, there's a mild aperture or openness. Anthony, I think you might be similar, but it's like, it's just never compelling. Like, wait, it happens to be the election of John the 23rd. That's just so convenient. That the culmination of modernism, where it can actually, it pushed past and it actually won. I just don't buy that.
If John Paul II was the Antichrist, did we get left behind? Did we miss the rapture? Like, what the hell are we still doing here? If doesn't the church triumphant happen after the Antichrist? That's a weird view, but
And it's the timeline that's set. Yeah, it seems like a lot of shit would have gone down after in the time that you and I, who are about the same age, have come of age. And it's been interesting, but it hasn't been as interesting as it's going to be then. But it's also just this preposterous thing I always get into with James, where he's saying that one of the main marks, he might not be saying it's the only mark, but every time he calls, he wants to talk about baptism by blood desire. Baptism by blood desire,
Feniite or something? Is that the Feniite thing?
It seems like he's piggybacking on that at least, and it's like, bro, I mean, if that I believe in baptism by blood / desire, QED, I am a religious indifferentist, then you're calling Aquinas and all of the high medieval schoolmen indifferentists. And I asked him last time, why does this matter so much after Vatican II? And then they're saying, well, because it's Ronnerism. I'm like, no, it's not. So there's just all these false equations that make me want to say, yeah, it's not even 1%. There's all these false equivocals, and it's just like, I'm getting more and more compelled toward sedevacantism is false. But I don't know.
You don't want to get me started on that topic.
I'm just saying there's no contradiction in their premises. It just seems unlikely that there hasn't been a real pope since 1958. There's never been a Saeculum Obscurum longer than 5-ish years. Yeah, four.
And there's no way to restore it. Like I don't know. There's no remedy to the situation.
Right. Yeah. What if they? Then you get into the theory, the pious opinion on how to restore it with weird councils and stuff. I mean, I do my best to be open. Where I'm a very opinionated cat, as are you, but I'm just never compelled. But I think is there anybody else that wants to talk about this stuff? No. Okay. I thought there'd be a lot of people wanting to talk. Anthony, great. It's
a fun one, man.
It was. It's very difficult to reproduce a good phone call where, I'll have one of these talks with someone. I'm like, oh, we should do a show on that. Usually it's less good. This was really good. And I appreciate.
I think we did hit pretty much most of the stuff we talked about in the phone call. And I was like, let's just do this. Like, it's a good conversation and people would love to listen in on this. So,
yeah. And I don't know exactly where it leaves us, but we weren't just dropping breadcrumbs, the a la Benedict. And I don't really know what the hell he was up to. At the end of the day, I really don't know why he contradicted his own writings so much, and JP2 contradicted his own actions with subsequent actions so much. It's very confusing. And then that's one thing we can all agree on. But I like what you're saying. It's just like, just wait. And don't feel like you're being cucked in your manhood by being like, look, I'm in the pews here. I'm in the patriarchal chair in my household patriarchy. I got to be active there. I don't need to be active with this stuff. I don't need to try
there's something to go touch grass. Like, go be a father, go be a husband, go raise your family in the Catholic faith, right? And it's like, I think what we did what I'm always trying to do is like have a theological framework to understand this stuff. So like the Tychonius framework does work for me. Like it kind of just works for me. And it's given me a theological framework to understand the insanity that we're all seeing, because we all see it's insane. But, if that, that's just kind of how I see it. But yeah. Benedict's an enigma. And, just weird that Peter Thiel's talking about him and reading some of the same books I am. So
I know. It's real. Well, he's working at it from cross purposes. Yeah, obviously. Yeah. You and I are working at the same purpose here. Well, anyway, everyone follow Anthony on Twitter, follow Avoiding Babylon on YouTube. Your show comes on 3 times a week or 2 times a week?
Yeah, we do Tuesdays and Thursdays.
You do Tuesday, Thursdays. Okay, cool. I tend to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The mind changes a lot. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. God bless everybody. Like and subscribe to this video. And Anthony, God bless you, man. We'll see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to catch up with you. God bless everyone else out there. Deus Volt. Take care of your families, and we'll see you next time.